Hello, friends. This is Mrs. Dennis, and right now I am going to introduce the read aloud for The Wind in the Willows, Chapter 6. So, when I introduce the read alouds, I always start with vocabulary. So, let's go ahead and get started with our vocabulary. So, our first word is advance, and advance means a movement in a forward direction. So, when you advance, you go forward, right? Pretty simple. I'm sure everybody's heard the word advance before. Our next word, recollection. The act of remembering something or something remembered. So if you recollect something, you recall it, like you recall something that happened yesterday. So recollection means remembering something. Reproached. It means scolded or corrected, expressed, disapproved, or blame. So you can see the picture of the mom kind of scolding the little boy for breaking the window with the ball, right? That act is reproaching. So reproached is scolding or correcting. Subtle. I know you see a B in there, but we don't say the B. It's subtle. It means faint, delicate, or slight. So typically, when we use the word subtle, we talk about the differences in something. So the subtle differences in the picture that you see. If you look at grandma's hair, you'll see that there's a red pin on one, but there's not a red pin on the other. If you look at the little girl, you can see on one picture her tongue is sticking out, and on the other picture it is not. So if you see on the right side of the screen, you can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things that are circled. Those are the subtle differences in the picture. And as a matter of fact, I can see a few more that haven't been identified. So there are a lot of subtle differences between the picture on the left and the picture on the right. Ubering. It means always accurate, okay, or making no mistakes. So I know when you hear the word Uber, U-B-E-R, means like the Uber driver, but in this case, Ubering is always being accurate. And if you can see that all of these arrows are directly in the middle, so that means all three of them did not make a mistake. Hit right on point, right on target. Friends, that's the end of our vocabulary, but guess what? We are still thinking about theme. And I know we've been talking about it every day, and like I said, we're going to continue talking about theme. So I know by now you already know what theme means, but I'm going to tell you again. The theme of a story is the message, lesson, or moral the author wants you to learn. So what did the author want us to think about as we read the story that they wrote? And then where does that theme show up in the story, and how does it show up with the individual characters? Now, we talked about some common themes. Remember, the common themes are courage, perseverance, honesty, good versus evil, kindness, acceptance, cooperation, loyalty. Remember, we talked about that. Friendship and love, compassion, right? So these are some of the common things. There are some more themes that we talked about as it relates to our story, The Wind in the Willows. Remember, we talked about responsibility as a theme, and we talked about irresponsibility as a theme, right? So let's ask ourselves, what idea stays with us as we talk about theme? I'm sorry, friends, I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to rule this down. What idea stays with us? We know that throughout our story, the idea of friendship stays with us, right? The entire story, the whole thing is about friendship. So that theme stays throughout the story. And then little pieces here. This chapter has a theme about friendship and loyalty. This chapter has a theme about friendship and responsibility, right? So remember, there can be more than one theme. And remember how remember when I tell you we want to think about how did the characters grow or change? What kind of growing are we talking about? Do you remember what I said? That's right. We're talking about the growing in how did they grow in their minds? How did they go from being irresponsible to responsible? How did they grow as a person? Remember, we're not talking about how they grew taller, right? We're talking about how did they grow on the inside? Okay? Remember, how did they grow on the inside? So some of the themes from the story are friendship, responsibility, loyalty, irresponsibility, and hospitality. All right, so those are just a few. Plots. So remember we talked about plot. The plot of a story is made up of the problem, important events, and the resolution. What happened in the story? We have the beginning, middle, and the end, first, next, and last, right? What problem did the character need to fix, right? So how do we pull out the plot? What do we need to do as readers, as good readers, right? Because we're all good readers in this, in this class. So what do we need to do as good readers? I'm going to tell you. Good readers, right? First of all, a good reader wants to know the plot so that they can understand what they're reading, right? So that's why a good reader wants to know the plot. And since we're all good readers, we all want to know the plot of a story. Now, how does a good reader identify the plot? Well, in order to summarize, right, you have to include in the plot what happened first, next, and last, or what happened in the beginning, the middle, and the end, right? You cannot have a plot if you don't talk about what happened in the beginning, what happened in the middle, and then what happened in the end. And then you want to talk about the problem. What problem did the character need to fix? Think about some of the problems that we had in our story, right? And how those characters, Mole, Rat, Toad, Badger, how did they fix those problems? So just like theme, we're always going to revisit plot. So plot and theme are two things that we're always going to come back to as readers. They're very important when we read. So let's talk about the plot of our story so far, right? And I know that we're all the way up to chapter 6. So let's kind of summarize what's happened so far in chapters 1 through 5. So remember, Water Rat and Mole meet and become friends. Mole and Rat are on the river talking about the wild wood. And remember when he said that they don't go into the wild wood? At Rat's home, this is where they are at Rat's home, where Mole stays with Rat, right? So do you remember then they got to Rat's home and Rat went to go get the dressing robe and the slippers for Mole so that he could be warm by the fire? He was showing Rat hospitality, right? Remember when we talked about hospitality and we talked about how hospitality is when someone comes to your home and you make them feel comfortable and you make sure their needs are met? Well, in this case, Mole needed dry clothes and slippers and he needed to get warm. So Rat did that for him. Rat provided hospitality to Mole. Oh, do you remember this one? Mole, Rat, and Toad go on a disastrous trip on the open road and then they return home, right? So this is when Mole, Rat, and Toad were in the caravan, the green and yellow one, and it flipped over because a motor car was coming on the road, right? So this wasn't the best trip for them. Mole goes to the wild wood to find Mr. Badger and he gets lost. Rat finds him in a hollow tree, right? So Mole wandered off trying to find Mr. Badger. He got lost. And then here comes Rat. Good old Rat, his friend, trying to find him. And then Rat and Mole find Mr. Badger. They eat lunch together and they spend the night at Badger's home, right? Because it was so much snow outside on the ground and they couldn't find their way. So they stayed with Mr. Badger that night. And they got up and they had breakfast in the morning too. So after they had breakfast, Mr. Badger shows Mole and Rat a shortcut from the wild wood and back to the riverbank. So let's think about Mr. Badger for a second. He let them in their home. He gave them food. He gave them lunch. He gave them breakfast the next morning. He showed them a shortcut to get back to the riverbank. Think about what kind of character Mr. Badger is. What kind of character do you think he is? Do you think he's nice? Do you think he's mean? Do you think he's a good friend? Do you think he shows hospitality? Do you think he's responsible? Do you think he shows loyalty? Another one of our themes. So I want you to think about that. You don't have to give any answers right now. It's just something that I want you to think about. Now, the name of the title of chapter 6 is called Dolce Domum, right? And this means home sweet home. So what do you think the saying home sweet home means? If I had to explain it to you, I would explain it as home is the best place of all. When it says home sweet home, have you ever just walked in the house and you're just like, home sweet home? And when do you think you might use this phrase? So think about it like this. If you were away from home and happy to be coming back, right? If you were away from home, let's say you went to an overnight camp, or let's say you went on vacation and you were gone away from your home for 5 days, and finally you get to come back home. Home sweet home, right? Home is the best place to be, right? So that is what this means. Dolce Domum. It means home sweet home. And then when you talk about home sweet home, you're talking about home being the best place that you can be. Something else for you to think about. Have you ever moved into a new place? What was it like? How did it make you feel? I want you to take those questions and I want you to think about Mole. Mole has been staying away from his home for several months. He was staying with Rat. When you listen to the story today, I want you to listen to find out how Mole feels when he passes through his neighborhood and smells his home. When you listen to the story, I want you to listen for the part where Mole smells his old home. And then I want you to think about how he feels. And I want you to just keep those thoughts in your brain so that we can talk about it tomorrow. How does Mole feel when he passes through his neighborhood and smells his home? You're also going to put those answers that you keep in your brain, you're going to put them down in our discussion, right? Because that's going to be one of your questions. How does Mole feel when he passes through his neighborhood and smells his home? So friends, those are the things that I want you to think about. I want you to go ahead and listen to our read aloud. And I want you to answer the questions in the discussion board about the read aloud. Now remember, if you need to listen to the read aloud for a second time through, no problem. You can do that because I really want you to think about how Mole feels when he passes through his neighborhood and smells his home, right? He gets a feeling, and I want you to be able to describe that feeling. And then I really want you to give me some really good answers when you answer your questions on the discussion board. All right, friends, that's all for now.